Hello and welcome to the fourth class in our consumer behaviour module, chapter 4, which is about consumer perception. And so in this chapter you will read about what role perception has in consumer behaviour, why customers can only actually process a small amount of the huge amount of information that we're sending out, how they organise that information, and how they add to it with stimulus from outside. Also, how they image us and how they actually feel about the quality of products and services and how customers actually handle risk. So what is perception? So it's the way that we as individuals select stimuli, organise it and interpret it into some sort of picture of the world. And so each of us has our own unique idea of what we see, like the world around us. So perception, what we're looking at is consumers' subjective ideas, because we give them input, sensory input, mainly visual, also oral stimuli, possibly smell and things like that as well, and touch, which we'll see later on, and how they actually process that. So sensation, you know, we have the 5 senses, so I think it's very easy to understand that consumers see products, but don't forget that also they can listen and that they can touch as well as taste and smell products, and obviously with services that are much more difficult. So this idea that we can listen to products is actually very important, and so some companies use that in the way that they know that something is satisfying. So for example, Volkswagen did research and found out on one of their models, the Passat I think, that the customers actually enjoyed the sound of the door being closed. I don't know how much experience you've got of different cars, but that it definitely is a difference between the heavy coach build type of European cars like Volkswagen and the lighter, thinner steel type cars like that come from Japan. And so Volkswagen played on this idea that when you pulled the door to, it actually made a large thump closing sound because customers felt it was a sign of quality. Another idea is people creating makeup, because makeup actually not very expensive to make. So what makes the difference between the very cheap and the very expensive makeup products is the packaging. And so again, as you open up a packet of mascara or a lipstick and you pull it open, there might be a click, or there's a click on closing it. And again, manufacturers realize that people like this because they can understand that the product is actually very expensive. And there are thresholds as well. So there's research in consumer behaviour showing that there's a threshold where consumers can only slightly understand that there's a difference. So at the bottom of the slide there, we see some pictures of an American product, I think it's Cake Mix, where Betty Crocker is supposed to be a real person, and we can see from the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, how this picture of Betty Crocker's changed over time. But is it a perceptible change? When they actually change the box and you pick it off the shelf, would you have realised that this is like the new Betty Crocker picture? Ambush marketing, more of an American aggressive style of marketing, where you get adverts places where you don't really expect to see them and you can't avoid them. So for instance, you could go shopping, you take the shopping trolley, and the actual bar of the shopping trolley has an advert on it. Or as you open to put your bag in, the place there actually would have an advert. Or possibly like in American university, as students come into the classroom and they sit at a seat, the seat in front will have an advert across the back of the chair, or there might be an advert in the washrooms or the restrooms. Experimental marketing, different ways to actually create bonds between the company and the consumers. Subliminal perception is an interesting concept, and the research shows that there's no evidence that it works. But many people think it's dangerous, and it's actually banned in many countries. I'll try to explain. So before digital technology, film, like the film in a camera, cinema film actually came on a reel with different frames. And I think sometime in the 1950s, people actually experimented with cutting the actual film and inserting just one frame, you know, that would be like 1/10 of a second. It would actually show while it was on the screen of an advert or of something else. And then after people had watched the film, they would ask them questions to try and find out who actually saw that subliminal image. So the subliminal is this idea that it's so small, so fast and so brief that if you blinked your eyes, you wouldn't actually see it. And so many people in the audience don't see it, and then other people do. And so psychologists originally thought this was quite dangerous, that as we were showing a film or a documentary, theatre, whatever, that one image, say, of Coca-Cola would actually cause everybody to rush out and actually become thirsty and actually want Coca-Cola. But recent research shows that that actually isn't the case. But it is still banned in many countries. So why do consumers only process a small amount of this actual information that we feed to them? So again, you can think about your own experience. Imagine when you're online surfing the web. How often, you're on Facebook, do you actually look at the adverts? No, you haven't got time because you're very busy, you have a specific job to do, and you're actually trying to focus on that. And so when we Google things, we don't look at the Google advertising on the right-hand side, or we're looking at what our friend said on Facebook. We're not actually looking at the post that is actually from a company sponsored underneath. Or if you're on Instagram, you're looking at your friends' pictures. You skip past those advertising ones. And this obviously is a problem for advertisers. So what do people do to actually get you to see their advert? Sometimes it's a contrast, that it would be very different to other people's adverts. Unfortunately, sometimes people try to do it by shocking you. This is often done in Britain for charity adverts, to show you how people are living very difficult lives, to get you to actually send money to support charities in different countries. And then there might actually be physical stimuli as well. So when we walk around the supermarket, as well as things being on the shelves, we actually see separate promotional areas. It might even be a real person actually promoting an item as well, to actually get us to notice it. So our perceptions of different things are affected by these items. At the top we have expectations, because as human beings we go about our day-to-day lives and we become familiar with our surroundings, and so we expect to see certain things. It says there's selective exposure. We actually tune out certain things that we don't want to watch. And so one of the problems in British advertising is that when it comes to the advertising break between programmes, people go and make a cup of tea. They're not interested. And so many of the adverts are now trying to be louder so that you actually take notice of them rather than go and make that cup of tea, or they try to be quite fun. And you see at the bottom there, it mentions perceptual blocking, which I think is what most of us do when we're actually using the internet. We block out a lot of the stimuli because we actually need to focus on the job that we're trying to do. So how do we organise all this information in our brains? Do we actually manage to get the message across so that people are actually storing these items to think about us later? And one of the things that we should actually do is understand stimulus and understand that people are looking for groupings of items. They're looking for some sort of closure to understand that they've received all the information. And how do people actually add other stimulus into this experience? Unfortunately, as human beings, we have a lot of stereotyping, that we have pictures in our minds about certain things that it's very hard to actually break out of. So if something is a French food product, immediately we have a stereotype of a French chef, that we think that there's lots of garlic, or there might be wine in something. You know, we're not seeing that actually could be something else. And there are things that trigger off these interpretations that we have. So we look at how something actually looks, what the colour of something is, and we have a first impression about certain items. And for some companies who are large, they're very lucky that they have this halo effect, that because their other products are good, we assume that this new one or this changed one will actually be good as well. So what about consumer imagery? How we actually look at the quality of different products and services and the symbolic elements within them. So a brand has an image. When we look at a particular brand, we think about its position in the market. So often when we talk about consumer items, cars are a good way of expressing this. So if I actually mention the word Ferrari, you're thinking of a very expensive, over $1 million type car. If I mention something like a Kia or a Hyundai, you're thinking of a bottom of the market car. If I mention a Ford Focus or a Volkswagen, you're thinking of it's not quite at the bottom, sort of moving towards the middle of the different range of cars. And so we see with car manufacturing that the brands have certain positioning like within the market. And it's quite difficult to move away from that. So Toyota, when they wanted to create a very luxury brand, even though Toyota is considered to be, you know, the best Japanese brand in terms of quality, they felt that that wasn't enough to break into the American market. So they created the brand Lexus. So it's made in the same place, made by the same people. The quality is the same as Toyota, but the idea is that by branding it Lexus, that it's supposed to show that it's even more superlative. But of course, everybody knows now that Lexus is Toyota, so I don't know whether that is actually working. Sometimes we need to update brands, because believe it or not, some brands are extremely old. There are some American brands like Quaker Oats, like Kellogg's, like Coca-Cola, that they actually go back to the 19th century. And so you can understand that over time, they actually need a little bit of updating sometimes. And so one of the examples there is Google. And so what we saw not that recently with Google was they overhauled the actual Google logo, you know, slightly changed the colors, slightly changed the font, freshened it up so that we see Google as keeping pace with the modern world. Another thing people do is packaging. I mentioned this before with makeup. It's very common in the world of perfume and makeup to make the packaging very, very expensive. Sometimes packaging can be up to 50% of the cost of the actual product of manufacturing. Why? Because when we buy these very expensive perfumes, we expect the boxes to be of a much higher quality cardboard, that the colouring is better, that the printing is better. We expect when we take the bottle out that there will be inner tubing to stop the bottle cracking, and that the bottle itself will be very special, because we've paid basically for coloured scented water, isn't it? We want to know that we've paid for something extremely special. And then we actually have an image of services as well. And so hotels, restaurants, they provide a service. How can they get that image across? By putting free gifts in the bathrooms, or bringing things to the tables, or making sure that the environment we're in is very pleasant. And again, sometimes they overhaul that to actually freshen up their image. We have an idea of what we want to pay for something, what we think that the price of something should be, and whether we think that is high, whether we think it's too low, or whether we think the price is about okay. And we also have reference prices, usually based on something in our memory, what we remember paying for something before, or for a similar product or service that we actually know the price of. So how do customers actually think about the quality? What do they understand by the word quality? And in addition to what we've actually got on this slide, I think that cultural issues come to play as well here, because if you live in a consumerist society and you're buying perfume, and you've already experienced hundreds and hundreds of different types of perfumes, a perfume would need to be very special in packaging and type for you to actually see it to be standing out. Whereas if you live in a poorer country where these things have newly come to the market, you don't have much experience of them. So I think where it says here these intrinsic and extrinsic clues are also based on your own experience as well. So intrinsic clues itself, like what colour it is, how it is scented, what it feels like when you touch it. And then extrinsic clues, like the image that the manufacturer is trying to create. And then with services, it's very difficult because these things are intangible. And then there's a relationship between quality and price. There is an idea that when something's a very luxury product, that if you put an extremely high price on it, even though you might not sell many, that profit margin is so massive that selling a few of something is actually quite okay. Where you sell something is important as well, because different stores have different images. Even within Britain or say other European countries, the different supermarkets themselves have a different image. There's cut price supermarkets, there's very expensive supermarkets. And so you might want to not stock your product in a very cheap supermarket in order to enhance its image. And then, as I said, there are some manufacturers who are so famous that we accept anything that they bring to the market as being good quality. And so finishing up with, how do consumers actually handle risks of purchase? Because again, some things are so expensive, like a car or very expensive perfume or designer clothes, that consumers don't want to make a mistake. So there is a risk, so this functional risk that the product will not perform, such as, do I actually want to buy a food processor? What if it's not very strong? What if it doesn't work? What if there's a physical risk, like if I buy this unpasteurized cheese, it might be very tasty, but I could get food poisoning. Do I actually want to risk this? Is there a financial risk? Like if I buy this telly today, tomorrow there might be a sale. You know, I want to wait and see, you know, whether the price will drop or not. Is there a psychological risk? Will I go home and find out I've bought the wrong type of phone and everybody's going to laugh at me? Is there a time risk? I'm wasting a lot of time researching these products. Maybe I should actually just get on and buy it. And then after the purchase, or before as well, how people actually handle the risk. So these days there's lots of information on the internet about different products, and many people tend to be brand loyal. I think on research it came out that British people, out of everybody in the world, are more brand loyal towards goods, whereas German people swap. They don't care. German people look at the price of something more than they actually look at the brand. And so consumer will actually look at that brand image. Is it carrying on being the type of brand that they've got used to? And some people actually look at the store as well, what store they're actually purchasing something in. And some people just want the most expensive because they want to show off. So that's the end of chapter 4, about how we can understand the perception of consumers. And thank you for joining us. Bye.